Welcome to the Legendary Upside Podcast. My name's Pat Kerrane. You can follow my content at legendaryupside.com. With me today, and rearing to go, Justin Herzig of Established Run. How's it going?
Dude, fantastic. We were just talking about literally nothing, and I was going to jump in and just continue that conversation.
Here, we're talking about corporate buzzwords. But yeah, we're going to talk on this podcast about the best ball rankings that Justin has over at Established Run. We have over at Legendary Upside. Some of the biggest differences between those. Sounds like you guys are going to be tweaking the rankings going forward a little bit to incorporate some more of the projection-based stuff. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. So basically, between when the big board was announced, which was ridiculously before the Super Bowl, even that's when we have to give our projections team a little bit of a break, and we're basically drafting off nothing. And so that's when it's like, okay, Justin, you're going to take the lead on these rankings. Obviously, you still get input from the rest of the team, but it's more of as I'm drafting throughout the big board in those contests, we make those adjustments. And that's basically like that. Hey, that's how we got to here. Starting this week, if not Monday, Tuesday, like early this week, you're going to have a kind of refresh on the ETR rankings. And those are the ones that Leone and Jack and the whole, and Dank and this entire Established Run team is doing more from a kind of, hey, top down or bottoms up analysis from a projection standpoint. And that's where the whole team still has input. And hey, we just brought Daigle on. He's already jumping in as well. But that's where it's more kind of a process base with the numbers.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll be curious to see what kind of changes and get your thoughts on where you think maybe some of those changes might occur. But we're gonna talk about some of the biggest differences that we have between the ranks currently. Let's start with Trey Benson, who some of these I think are a little bit of a difference in sort of the way we're like putting our rankings out there, because Trey Benson, I am lower than you on Trey Benson, which I find annoying because I like Trey Benson a lot. And it's really a matter of I'm only 9.5 spots ahead of ADP on Trey Benson. And so the problem or the reason that I'm behind you is not that I'm low on Trey Benson. It's that I'm sort of capping how far above ADP I'm letting players go in the ranks. You guys are at 93. So we're both actually pretty bullish on Trey Benson, who has an ADP of 110. What are your thoughts just generally? Because there's a few of these differences stem from that. What are your thoughts on, like, are you taking Trey Benson at like 93, a couple rounds ahead of ADP? I mean, if you want to build up a position on him, I think that's reasonable in that part of the draft because you will find people that just reach ahead of ADP on him. But just your general thoughts in this part of the season on like kind of those bigger reaches.
Yeah, I mean, I'm more willing to be higher exposed to a player in the big board before the actual NFL draft, because I think the rankings or the ADP is not nearly as efficient as what we're going to get come summer, come August. And so if you want to take stands on guys, especially ones where I think there are just silly upside, especially for rookies, I'm fine with saying, hey, I'm willing to go up to 30, maybe even higher % of your exposure on a certain player. And sometimes that does mean actually taking them a round or so early. Now, usually I'm still like kind of that more value-based drafter, so I still am overweight on some of my players. I think my highest exposures, I shared this on Twitter a little ago, was like around the 30%, maybe low 30s on some. So rarely am I going to go more than a round before, but I think the ranks need to be a little more true, or at least that's the way I'm trying to do it. So like, hey, I would be willing to go stand on, like for this. And it's interesting because when we talk about rookie running backs going into this, last couple months, I was low on them all. I didn't think that we had any real stellar standouts, but as we saw what happened with free agency and some of the great landing spots available, Dallas, Chargers, maybe Vegas, some of these guys are going to get great spots. And I do think, as you would say, like some of these rookies actually do have potentially those kind of legendary breakout seasons, if not even the whole season, just like that second half that we really care about.
I agree with you. Yeah, I like Trey Benson a lot. I've been getting more bullish on him over time. I think the combine, he was really athletic, 9.7 RAS score there. That's obviously nice. He's not the only guy that was athletic, but when you start to think about Trey Benson's profile, where he's like, he showed some versatility as a receiver. He had really nice breakaway numbers. He was a good tackle breaker. He was a committee back though. And so it's like, those backs, I think, are like especially it's especially important to know where they're going to go in the draft, because like we've seen committee backs come in and be like pretty awesome. Like Miles Sanders was a committee back. Melvin Gordon was not like a super workhorse in college. So if you get, and I mean, Melvin Gordon though was a first round pick. So, you know, it's kind of like if a guy is a first round pick or early second round pick, I don't care that much that he was a committee back, because he's going to get handed a job. And if he's good and he gets handed a job, then he'll be a good fantasy back. If he's, you know, just good and he's behind an entrenched starter and has to make his way up through the depth chart, then I start to get a little bit concerned about the fact that he was a committee back in college and maybe he doesn't displace somebody. But as Benson's ADP, or as draft capital starts to look a little bit more like second round as opposed to third, I'm excited about him. So I am going to be annoyed if the ETR drafters are sniping me on Benson when I'm almost 10 picks out of ADP here.
I feel that. I think we also need to make note, if you're a running back draft in the second round right now, that's like that's like first half of first round draft capital when Melvin Gordon was drafted. And I think teams are kind of realizing that, like, yes, you still have the elite prospects like the Bijan of last year. And I think even when Zeke was drafted, like those were like, we knew this is going to be a stellar. But the guys that are being drafted in that second, third round, I don't think of them as second, third round draft capital from that 5-10 years back. So I think when we are doing kind of comparatives, since from like, hey, how much are they actually investing in these running backs? We should think of that second round being like, that's a ton. When we then think of the spots, like, all right, let's use the Chargers. Yeah, you put Trey Benson up against Gus Edwards. Like, yeah, Gus Edwards is going to start as the starter or whatever, and like, you know, maybe cut into them early. But I have no confidence that someone like Trey Benson, his athletic profile, even if you say like, okay, he's going to only take like 60%, that's still phenomenal from like an actual today's NFL. And we're expecting that upside coming later on in the year.
For sure. Let's talk about a guy that you're quite a bit bullish on than me, and I'm not, and I'm even with ADP. So this isn't like a philosophical thing. This is, you like this guy more than me. And it's Diontae Johnson. So Diontae Johnson, and I know Ben Gretch really likes Diontae Johnson. I'm starting to feel like I'm like missing the party here a little bit. I have him at 80. He's got an ADP of 79.4, so rated ADP, but you're quite a bit more bullish on Diontae Johnson, having him at 69. So, you know, you're like a round ahead of ADP. I've had trouble getting excited just because like there are other guys there. They could add somebody, but what's the bull case here?
This is an interesting part of the draft too, where I just care about, I prefer Diontae Johnson before that big chunk where you drop down to like Romeo Doubs and such. Mm-hmm. And between there are all those running backs and tight ends. And so when I just was drafting, I was like, you know what? I'd rather take Diontae Johnson. I think there is that bull case of he's just a more athletic, better football player than what Adam Thielen was last year. We knew that the touchdownness from 2 years ago, we proved out last year that was fluky. He actually can play there. And so I see it as, I think there's a bull case on a bad team. You bring in Dave Canales. We've seen what he did with Geno, with Baker last year. And then when you look at the actual draft aspects, and if you do a 2v2 of, okay, grab a running back there and then a wide receiver 2 rounds later versus a wide receiver there and a running back 2 rounds later, those running backs are pretty even. It's pretty flat in my mind. And like that, what are we talking? Picks?
It is flat. It's definitely
95.
Flat.
But I don't think it's flat from a wide receiver standpoint. I think Diontae versus Romeo Doubs is a substantial chunk from a median and upside projection. Or really median projection, and maybe their upsides are similar, but like Dobbs' chance of hitting it with other 3 other receivers is less.
Are you not as into the Texas rookies, A.D. Mitchell and Xavier Worthy? Because those are kind of the guys. I'm building a lot where I have 4 wide receivers up to this point, and then I'll grab one of these wide receivers fairly frequently.
Yeah, I like the wide receivers. I will be, fully transparent that rookie wide receivers, I am leaning the most on other people for takes at this spot. And then we also have if you can get yourself into the end of the first round, that's huge. If you end up getting one of the early second, like oh, it's just so much worse when you look at the landing spots right now. So like some of these are still going to look great, but I mean, this year with rookies compared to the past couple of years, we are actually, and you're probably to blame, drafting them at their upside. Like their upside is baked in at their current price.
I'm trying.
We're still going to get some that are great hits, but like, I still like the rookies, the rookie wide receivers, but like, this is the first year that it's not like, oh my God, I love them, because they are actually decently priced. Like Josh Downs is right there. He's also a really good wide receiver. We saw it. Yeah, Anthony Richardson, I don't like the wide receiver, blah, 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 but like,
Yeah. I do think that AD Mitchell, Xavier Worthy, as you go down, Troy Franklin a little bit, although his chances of going round 1 have definitely dropped. But those two guys do kind of stand out as like, I mean, you're paying a lot more for Brian Thomas, and Brian Thomas partly makes sense because Brian Thomas is definitely going in the first round, but he's got some red flags, and AD Mitchell also has, I think, worse red flags, but he's super athletic, big, and probably going in the first round as well. So Mitchell's someone like, it's tough for me to get like super excited, but I am trying to click him because I actually think he's underpriced if he ends up like if you want to say who's the most likely to like bank an incredible landing spot, it's probably AD Mitchell at this point, because I think he goes in the first round given the size athleticism combo, but the end of the first round where all the best landing spots are.
Yeah, and then you're like Buffalo, and you're like, whoa, okay, exactly. Now we do. I'm all on board. I'm not against those guys at all. I think I'm probably, it's probably like, I don't know if we look at the rounds, but I'm probably like right at or just behind. Mentally, I think I'm probably like a half a round behind them, but that's just because they just keep moving up, and I can't keep chasing them. Right? Like I had been above all these guys, and now it's like every 2 days that
Well, let me here, I'm going to share. You put this together of guys that we're the most different on. Is there anyone you want to talk about?
Let's see. I mean, so we'll start with the ones that I'm most bullish, because the ones that you're most bullish on, I think it's really interesting because you've got both the Tennessee running backs, both the Chicago wide receivers. So I'd love to hear those takes there, because I think that's probably more of a macro team aspect. But like, I don't know. I think Rachaad White's probably one of the most interesting ones here, where at the beginning of the offseason, I was like, Rachaad White is way too expensive. He was actually going around like pick ADP 30, 32 or something. But if you look at how the offseason played out, like this actually looks really good for him. There's not going to be any free agent signing that goes in there to take any work. The Bucs have a lot of needs, especially on defense. I don't expect them to be drafting another running back. And if so, it's probably a late one. So I think this is one where probably the general hate had gone too far. And I was part of the hate for Rachaad White, which like things actually worked out pretty well for him. And if you look at from a success rate last year, I think he was RB7. And that was after like 3 of his first 6 weeks. He had like fewer than 6 fantasy points. So he had that slow start. And then they actually started using him more as that workhorse. So I think he's one where he's in that like prototypical, RB dead zone. But everything that we've seen played out for this year so far and what that team is going to look like, I think that's actually like turning into a little bit of a, I don't know. I'm still at ADP, but yeah.
Yeah, Rachaad White's like, he just feels like a bet on the status quo, because so he had by NFL Next Gen, he had a 37% success rate, which is not good. It's not like horrendous, but he was behind DeAndre Swift by 0.1%. So, he was behind Saquon Barkley, Ramondre Stevenson. He was just above Tony Pollard and Travis Etienne. And they had minus 110 rush yards over expected. So he was a pretty inefficient runner. Actually, that's the lowest rush yards over expected of any running back last season. Part of it is like you get penalized for volume because it's if you're accumulating negative rush yards over expected on a per touch basis and you get a bunch of touches, you're going to finish last, which is what happened with him. He's a decent receiver, but like bad rusher, like running it back and hope it kind of plays out again like it did last year. I'm just like, that just makes me nervous. It just makes me nervous every time. And I would be willing to kind of come up on him if he survives the draft without like honestly, even an Audric Estime would make me nervous about, if a 4th round Audric Estime, 4th round Braylon Allen makes me like really nervous about Rachaad White. And I guess the other part of it for me is that in this part of the draft, I'm usually taking, of all these players, I'm probably taking like Brian Thomas the most because all these guys are gone. And it's just like one wide receiver left. And I'm worried about only having like 2 wide receivers through 3 rounds or something. So I have to take the receiver there. I guess what I'm trying to say is that if I'm taking a detour, Rachaad White isn't an especially appealing detour for me because I could definitely see him kind of paying off this price tag pretty easily. Kind of just does what he did last year, which is worth more than this price tag. But I don't know that he has a lot more upside, and I'm just worried about how good he is as a rusher.
Yeah, no, I think that's all completely fair. And I think from a draft macro standpoint, so much of like who I'm actually drafting in this 4th, 5th round matters on who I draft in the 1st and 2nd, because like this year, it already feels so much like the wide receiver drop off hits hard in like the 6th round, other than the rookies. And I think we need to contextualize when we draft, because there's been one school of thought that I've seen is it's like, hey, it's okay to kind of forego some wide receivers early because there's so many great wide receiver rookies. And I think we need to cool that thought process a little, because when we think about the wide receiver rookies, 1 or 2, like some may hit really hard. And that's why we love them, because individually there's huge upside. But if you are really counting on just a slew of these kind of rookie wide receivers and you forego the early studs, these elite ones, yes, you might still hit on 1 or so, but like a lot of these are still going to turn out to underperform. And that's just baked in, especially at their current ADP. So for me, like I've been just going so heavy in these wide receivers, but as you're saying, like if I do go 3, 4 wide receivers in the 1st, and then I'm seeing that Rachaad White in the, beginning of the 5th or so, end of the 4th, that's when I'm like, okay, I'm okay if this is my running back 1 and this is my detour there. But yeah, it's also, he was going, and we're talking big board here, he was going 30, 32, 34 for so long. So you are getting that kind of positional value aspect for the draft.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point, is that he was going quite a bit more expensive and now you're getting a discount. I tend to take like the detour a little earlier with like a James Cook or a Josh Jacobs, or I'll take it with like a Mixon in the 6th, or I'll just punt it and go with, my guy Jalen Warren. I'm taking a ton of Warren. But like Montgomery's we're behind ADP, but like he's a pretty good RB1 in a zero, like a true zero running back build. So that's just
when you get to those 70s, that's when RB feels great. There are so many guys there that historically would have been 4th, 5th rounders, and like they have legitimate upside. But if we do want to talk about that range where it's the opposite, where you're bullish, I'd love to hear the kind of Tennessee case, because for me, initially when I saw Pollard going to Tennessee, I liked it a lot because my intuition, maybe it was wish casting, but like I thought Tony Pollard was going to be kind of the guy there, and Tajay would just kind of spell him. But the more I'm hearing, it sounds like they're going to be interchangeable. Those quotes just came out in the past day. Their win total is 5.5 with, I think, juice on the under. So like, I'm scared of the Tennessee, but you seem a little more bullish in general for me.
Yeah, I am. I think it's just volume. That's why the big thing for me is like, you're going from this like Mike Vrabel. It wasn't fully like Arthur Smithified, they weren't in that tier of passing offense, but I think that we're now looking at a team that looks like they're trying to figure out what they have in Levis, right? That's why you bring in Calvin Ridley. That's why you bring in like a Tony Pollard, who, is not, Pollard is more of like a playmaker than he is like a workhorse battering ram. So I'm seeing that team is one that's like, let's put some weapons around Will Levis and let's see what we have. And odds are they're going to move on after the year. But I think it could be like, they could be kind of a more of like a fun, bad team than, we're used to with them. I think, with Pollard, I'm a little behind ADP, but I'm not out. With Spears, basically even with ADP. So these are not guys that I have a big stance on, but I think they're both fine as you're betting on this offense to be, obviously you're only taking one of them. So I kind of view it as a similar thing to like the Bengals, where like I'm taking Zach Moss and I'm taking Chase Brown. I understand that one of these guys will fail and one of these guys will hit as my hope. Like that is when I'm taking both, I'm hoping, one is a hole in my portfolio and one is a big hit in my portfolio. It's possible they cannibalize each other all season. But I think that Spears and Pollard are both intriguing for different reasons. I'm mixing both in. Spears is actually the guy that I probably need to make more of an effort to get more of since he's fall. I thought he was going to fall further than he did. And I basically had to have the conversation with myself of like, am I going to be out on Spears now? And I decided like, I do want to get some.
Yeah, I think the Cincy versus Tennessee comparison is really interesting. And so for me, with Tennessee, I think that as I mentioned, that 5.5 win total, a much worse team, a bad offensive line that is getting a little better. They've made some strong signings, but still like not a great offensive line. And the coaching makes it sound like these are going to be interchangeable. They're both going to have roles. It's unlikely, barring an injury, one separates. When I compare to Cincinnati, I have no idea who's going to be in what role between, Moss and Chase Brown, but It's a great offense. We know how valuable that running back role is. And I think there's actually a better chance that one of those two emerges as the guy in Cincy, where I don't foresee that in Tennessee. So when I'm comparing those, I'd much rather take more takes on the Chase Brown, the Zach Moss. The major difference here is I believe that Pollard and Tajay are both probably better backs than Chase Brown and Zach Moss. But
it's two things. It's that, but also Tajay was a 3rd round pick last year, and they just signed Pollard, so they're done. They're not bringing in somebody.
That's fair. Bengals may draft someone.
Bengals could draft somebody. I am a little nervous about a shoe drop. Like they could draft somebody. They could bring in a Jonathan Brooks. They could bring in who that wouldn't be a total disaster because he's not going to start probably in the early part of the season. But they could bring in a Trey Benson, a Jalen Wright, where you're like, I think he's immediately the best back in this backfield right now. So I'm in on this backfield, but I think that would be my guess is that if they both survive this, that the Chase Brown and Zach Moss move up, and one of them is challenging Spears at least.
Yeah. Jonathan Brooks would actually be interesting just because they're like, hey, we're just going to redshirt you this first year. They would have to be a really bullish kind of talent evaluation, and you're thinking for years 2 to 4. Any of the other high draft capital ones, like Zach Moss at $8 million, 2 years, like that's not the cheapest when you do if they're bringing
it's
someone
a 1-year deal though. I think they can get out completely after this season.
Okay. I mean, so it's possible. Yeah. But I guess I'm not crazy bullish on them, but I think when I'm evaluating upside scenarios, that's just where I think my head is around the Cincy versus the Tennessee.
They save $3.5 million by cutting him after the year, eat 1.5 for doing that. So
you can do that if you want. It's whatever.
Yeah. It would be. I could see them drafting someone. I kind of hope they don't because I think both Moss and Chase Brown are interesting. But the guy that I think I'm legitimately different. The guy I'm legitimately different on in Tennessee is Hopkins. I'm excited about Hopkins. I think Hopkins is still good. I don't think Calvin Ridley is very good. He was good, but then he took a year and a half off and came back and wasn't that great. He's the guy who's getting the quarterback downgrade. Hopkins was producing efficiently with Will Levis last year. There's some, more target competition from Ridley, but there was zero. It's not the worst thing in the world to go from nobody. Unfortunately, I wish Treylon Burks was pulling his weight a little bit more, but there was no target competition. It's like Nick Westbrook, Akine, and stuff. They don't really even have a tight end they throw to all that much. And then you bring in Calvin Ridley. I'm thinking that Hopkins still looks like at least 1A and potentially clear 1 on an offense that should throw more than it did last year. So my thinking is more target competition, but more volume. Hopkins is still good.
I mean, so you're talking about for the Calvin Ridley one, his ADP has dropped 3 picks since it's probably the second most shocking of the ADPs behind the Saquon and what happened with that Saquon situation.
And we agree. We're both behind ADP on Calvin Ridley. I'm closer to you, and it's the ADP baked in here. Is we're in total agreement on Calvin Ridley. So I don't understand that at all. But you're more nervous. Like you have Ridley ahead of Hopkins.
I moved him back. So again, the Ridley ahead of Hopkins is still like there's an ADP count, input, ADP input to that. And if you were getting, people were spending 57, so if we're getting him at 81, like it's for the Hopkins one, like I get it. I have a feeling when we get the more projections out there, it's going to be a little more bullish on him, but it's an age 32 wide receiver that just lost substantial volume to Calvin Ridley. It's still Will Levis. Again, I'm still not bullish at all on this Tennessee team. And like, what is the breakout world here? Like everything is like the perfect scenario for DeAndre Hopkins last year, except maybe this year Will Levis could be better or something. And like, I don't know.
And they didn't pass that much,
Yeah. And so maybe they passed more, but then they brought in Pollard. I don't know. But like, for you to tell me what the story is for Hopkins to have this huge breakout, like it's got to be that's a parlay and a half.
I agree. That's not what I'm looking for. What I like about Hopkins, I'm taking a lot of Christian Kirk, and Christian
Kirk at ETR. Don't even start there. Oh yeah.
Okay. Well, like, what's Christian Kirk's mega breakout? It doesn't exist. He's a slot receiver on a good, not elite offense. They're probably going to bring in someone else in the draft. It's a deep draft. It's not that you're not betting on Kirk because he's going to like explode this year. You're betting on him because you're getting like production that you usually pay like a third round price tag for in the 5th or 6th round. And that's kind of how I feel about Hopkins, where it's like he's kind of like a 4th round type of production value that I'm getting in like the 6th round when I fucking need that wide receiver. Like, man, do I need that wide receiver in the 6th round? Like, he allows me to take a Kyron Williams, right? Or someone, it's usually on the back half of the board. And he allows me that detour. He allows me to take the elite tight end, which I am taking. We'll talk about Travis Kelce soon. I'm taking a lot of Mark Andrews. I'm taking a lot of Travis Kelce. I'm taking a lot of the other. I mean, the thing to me is that at tight end, the top 2 guys are really underpriced, and then everyone else is also well priced. So I'm like trying to take a lot of those tight ends. Also, tight end dries up and it's like a wasteland late in the draft. So I want to get it taken care of early. And Hopkins is like one of those guys who's just been someone where I'm like, yes, you're not going to crush it, but you had 2.09 yards per hour last year playing with Ryan Tannehill and Will Levis. You have an offensive a design that's coming in. You're coming from the Bengals. It should be a little bit well designed. They had Jake Browning, looking efficient here. I don't think it's going to be like a disastrously inefficient passing game now. I'm actually thinking it'll be more efficient, and I'm thinking I'm getting more volume as we move from, the Mike Vrabel coaching tree to the Bengals coaching tree. So that's kind of my thoughts we're neither of us is afraid of Ridley. That's probably the big point of failure, is that Ridley's actually the guy there. But even in that role, I think Hopkins probably gets some deep threat stuff going on, and maybe I'd get bailed out by a spike week at the right time.
Yeah. I do feel like the Ridley unknown does eat into Hopkins's safe scenario. And so
that's true.
If we accept that Hopkins lacks that upside that I'm looking for, which, yes, you're right. If you're drafting him at 75 or whatever it is, that's his ADP. Like, he doesn't have to have top 5 wide receiver upside. But I do think that upside is capped from not only the age aspect, the addition of Calvin Ridley and such. He's just not as safe as then you're hoping for. If we're playing for that median outcome of a round or 2 value, maybe that's not actually that safe because he is that aging wide receiver and they brought in Calvin Ridley and spent bukus of money on Calvin Ridley too. So even though I'm not bullish on Calvin Ridley, I do still feel that thorn in the Hopkins scenario.
That's a good point. I mean, if you're going for safety, then he's maybe not. Yeah, he's not super safe. It's just he was good enough last year. Like, he had let me pull up his open score. That might be the last 2 years combined. He was still
playing next to Treylon Burks. Like, I know his yards per route run was very high. I think you said it was over 2, but there was no target competition either.
That's true. That's definitely true. Yeah. And let me pull up his open score. Hopkins was at, he had an 82 open score last year, which was behind Keenan Allen, CeeDee Lamb, Khalif Raymond somehow, Tyreek Hill, Garrett Wilson. So maybe he's the second Khalif Raymond. What the heck's going on in here? But
most of those names are pretty good.
yeah. I guess like the thing about Hopkins is that you're risking catastrophic failure. Like if he doesn't have it anymore, it's going to go like that's the way like age curves tend to work, right? It's not that guys like just kind of come on down slowly. Like they hit a wall. He's 32. He could hit that wall. Calvin Ridley's there to scoop up the targets. And all of a sudden he's just like useless. That's a risk, but he was legitimately really good last year, got open, was efficient. So I'm just like kind of betting that if it's Hopkins from last year versus Ridley, I think he smokes him. But you're right. I'm probably overemphasizing the floor, given that we're talking about a 32-year-old wide receiver playing with Will Levis. Let's talk Kelce, another old guy that I like.
I'm excited for this one.
Yeah, okay, I get if I was like gonna say, Pat, you're too high on Kelce, it would be they're likely to want to save him for the end of next year too. So, he's old and you're sacrificing the end of the season potentially, which is not something we want to do in these tournaments.
So let me tell you a story of Travis Kelce 2023. First, we go by the numbers. First half, so games 2 to 8, he missed weeks 2 to 8. 31% targets per route run, 27% of the team's targets, 28% of the team's air yards. You love all that. Second half of the year, 17% of the targets per route run, 18% of the targets, 19% of the air yards. So that's 45% fewer targets per route run, 33% fewer targets, 32% fewer air yards. Now, one football season, it's a small sample. So we're like, maybe that's wonky because his career definitely leans far more towards that first half. But then at the combine, you've got Andy Reid in his interview. I think it might have been with either Matthew Berry or one of the underdog guys. I get him confused. Who knows? But he specifically was saying, yes, we planned to have, Travis Kelce play less, get more rest as we lead into the fantasy season. Because if you're into the playoffs, when the playoffs hit, those numbers look far more like the beginning. That's when we saw the Travis Kelce of old. So I believe that there is a coherent strategy by the Chiefs that when we get closer to the playoffs, which they're going to make, they're going to be a top 3 team in the NFL next year. They're not going to use Kelce that much. And you're the one, you say it so much. We care about the playoffs. We care about the fantasy playoffs.
You're right.
And everything you're telling me for this aging tight end is that he's not going to play that much in our fantasy playoffs.
That's the concern for sure. I think there's a few things about last year, though, that are interesting to note about the end of the season. One is that they're trying to work in Rashee Rice at that same point. You're seeing his routes really spike over those final few weeks, and he's doing some stuff over the middle of the field that's similar to what Kelce's doing. So part of it is like, if Rice takes a step forward and he's able to do some of the stuff that Kelce's doing throughout the whole year, maybe there's like less of an emphasis of like pulling Kelce's targets down at that point specifically.
Yeah, or they just do it the whole year.
They just do they do some of it the whole year, sure. But Kelce was out there in those weeks that we're talking about. Kelce ran 40 routes in week 14. He ran 37 routes in week 15. He ran 48 routes in week 16. He dropped to 26 in week 17. So, and I've been told that's all that matters. So that's not great. But then in the playoffs, he was at 39, 23, 39, 48. So it was actually like route volume. Those last 4 weeks were pretty similar to the playoffs. It's just that he started to get used like Travis Kelce again. Obviously, it's going to really suck if he doesn't get used in those final 4 weeks like we're used to. And I do acknowledge that is a risk. But if the offense is a little bit more firing on all cylinders, they bring in Marquise Brown. I think they probably still add a rookie at some point. And it's like it's elite tight end, right? At elite tight end, the whole bet is this guy can do something and is a good bet to do something where you're going to find spike weeks at tight end, but like it's hard. And it's not hard when you bet on the greatest receiving tight end of all time, right? So you're getting this guy in like the 3rd, 4th round, and often in the 4th, who can do something in week 15, week 16, that would be awesome if it was week 17, but you can do something where he's the number one wide receiver on a Patrick Mahomes offense. And it's less likely that he does that in that real money week than it has been in years past. But we are getting a discount, man. This is a dude we've taken at like the 105, 106. I am getting him at like the 405. This is a huge discount on a player who just led his team to the Super Bowl as the number one wide receiver here. I mean, he finished the season, including the playoffs, with 2.02 yards per route run. That's higher than he had in 2021. That's still an elite mark. Like, you do have rest concerns, but like the playoffs to me are bullish in that, is Travis Kelce done? Was the question we were asking heading into the play. Rashee Rice going ahead of him in playoff best ball. And now I don't think Travis Kelce is done at all. I think there's some management concerns, and those management concerns are more likely to strike at the end of the season. But like, this is a volatile game. And if you're going to give me the guy who I think still the best bet at tight end in any given week in the 4th round, I will draft him.
All right. So 2 things there. One, agreed. He's on the field. He was running the routes. And if Andy Reid didn't tell us this narrative, if this was just a fantasy football narrative that we created in our bedrooms and our basements, like, then
I agree with that. Yeah.
But
it's a lot more legit.
Yeah. And like, it just tells me this is what they plan to do. They really didn't want to throw him the ball. They didn't want him to get hurt. And so that's what and then playoffs come, the real playoffs. And they're like, holy crap, it worked out well. We won the Super Bowl. Why would we do that any differently next year? Let's make sure we have fully healthy, clicking on all cylinders Travis Kelce in the playoffs when we don't care about the last few games because we've already locked up our spot. And we have Rashee Rice, who can play in the middle of the field. And now we have Marquise Brown, who can actually play on the outside. We may even bring in another 2nd round, 3rd round wide receiver. Who knows? This all makes too much sense. And then, so that's the Kelce. From a draft standpoint, I'm all 100% aboard on elite tight end, especially this year. I don't understand why they're at a discount for where they are. But like,
I'm getting like I'm taking crazy pills. I'm going to that level of this. So can you just tell me that you like elite tight end? Because feel like I'm losing my mind. Like, it seems like structurally the easiest thing in the world right now. Just make sure you grab one of those guys.
As long as you don't include Sam Laporta.
Actually, he's the one I don't really like at price as much.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Mark Andrews, Trey McBride. There's been some really interesting debates on the Trey McBride aspect within the ETR. So that's going to play out throughout the summer because there's some strong voices. But either way, I think like the upside's there. But like, yeah, Mark Andrews, I think, is my 2nd highest owned tight end. Yeah. And for that to happen at a player who's getting in like a late 4 draft cost or something. And so that's where, why am I taking Travis Kelce a round or 2 earlier, a round or so earlier when I've got Mark Andrews? And I like Mark Andrews straight up from these arguments that I'm saying than Travis Kelce. So that's why I'm just not taking Travis Kelce. I also think there is a wide receiver mini teardrop about where Kelce goes. And then again, versus like where the McBride and the Mark Andrews go. So I've been taking my wide receivers in the 3rd, 4th, and then I'm taking my Mark Andrews, Trey McBride in the 4th, 5th.
That I completely agree with you on. And I will often, like if I'm looking at Kelce and I'm in a position where I think Andrews has a good chance to come back, like if I'm in the middle of the 4th and I've got a decision between Kelce and like, let's say I've got Puka and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to grab Kupp. I'm going to miss out on Kelce. And what's going to happen is I'm going to get Mark Andrews in the 5th. And Mark Andrews in the 5th is fucking nuts. I truly don't understand how we are given this opportunity. He's the number 1 wide receiver on his team with tight end eligibility, with a good quarterback. And they passed more. I think, Baltimore didn't pass as much as we were hoping last year because their defense was elite. But like this, I'm like more excited about Baltimore this year than, like last year last year was sneaky bullish on Baltimore is what I'm trying to say. Like, if that defense takes a step back, like this offense could be really, really fun. So that part I agree. If you want to push if you're saying I'm going to pass on Kelce in the 4th, take Mark Andrews or Trey McBride or, in the 5th, or get one of these other tight ends in the 6th, like, yeah, That sounds great. Like but I'm mixing in Kelce for sure. I have more Andrews than Kelce. But I do not want to be fading 4th round Kelce, man. After he just like crushed in the playoffs, like really good player available in the 4th rounds with a massive positional advantage. Like that's like sometimes when I think of this stuff, I'm like, what am I going to hate myself for later? Like, what am I going to be like, how did I miss that? And 4th round Kelce seems like one I would have a hard time explaining to myself in December. Like, no, there was a good reason. I just can't remember what it was.
Yeah. I mean, keep it simple, stupid, all of that. I don't know. Like, also, I ended up with a lot of Lamar. So, like, I'm grabbing more Mark Andrews. I haven't gotten that much Patrick Mahomes. He is at a price now that it actually is tolerable. But just from a structure, like, I have so much Jalen Hurts, so much so much Lamar before. But yeah, I think we've gone through this topic. Yeah.
What about Quentin Johnston, who I'm ready to give up on, and you seem to be.
You tell me the Quentin Johnston. I mean,
what do you mean? I don't have to tell you. I'm 25 picks behind ADP.
It's insane. Okay, I hate that I have to be like bullish on Quentin Johnston, but like, there's literally no one else there. I do not think Harbaugh's going to be taking a wide receiver with this 5th, 6th, or whatever it is overall pick.
He should, but you're right, he won't.
Right, and so like, they're going to go into the season most likely with Quentin Johnston and Josh Palmer as their top 2 wide receivers. And like, is there a world where I'm getting this in the 13th, 14th round that they're like, you know what? Let's find a way with our crazy first run game with some strong play action that we're finding new ways to get Quentin Johnston the ball. And like, we're actually designing him for his skill set, which granted, there's not much skill set we learned, but like for that little skill set of just putting the ball in his hands.
Yeah.
Do you nearly need that craziness for a 14th rounder? And you're looking at the other guys, or maybe it's 13th rounder that are going around him. It's just, there's got to be some level of upside that I'm still clinging on to that price.
Yeah, I just want to reset the bet basically, and like give me a wide receiver who I don't know anything about. And yeah, you're right. Like the opportunity.
Zay Jones ahead of him.
Yeah, because Zay Jones is actually going to be out there running routes all season, and Quentin Johnston's probably getting benched.
Yeah, sure. Quentin Johnston has a 10% chance. That's probably has a 5 to 10% chance of finishing as like a top 15, top 20 wide receiver. Maybe.
I'm taking the under on 5 to 10.
5%? Whatever it is.
Yeah, I would give you 5 for sure.
Okay. A better chance of Quentin Johnston, at least on individual games. There's definitely Quentin Johnston has the individual game upside that someone like Zay Jones or one.
I'll move him ahead of Zay. I'll put him one.
Okay, good. We're settled. No. But I think that's where it comes down to, is just like, there are so many ways that this pick fails, but I'm okay with a 14th rounder failing, because turns out they almost all fail. You look at the 10th round last year and it was like literally all of them failed you. So yeah, I'm okay with a 14th round failing, but I think Quentin Johnston being the number 1 wide receiver, new coaching staff, like there's just so many unknowns that are coming to play with the new coaching staff, with no number 1 wide receiver, that maybe, just maybe, they make him a focal part and he turns into the first round value that he actually was drafted for.
Yeah, I think so. The thing with Johnston, in terms of his efficiency, like when you are as inefficient as he was, then I think it's not that you're done. You can come back from it. We have seen, Davante Adams. That's the guy who came back from like this level of inefficiency, but it's gonna take a while. Is generally the way I view it. Of like you've got some work to do, and so it kind of like Davante Adams. Like Davante Adams was very inefficient his rookie season, but they never hinted that like they were moving on. They were just like, yeah, we're going to keep rolling this guy out there. He had 1.06 yards per out run as a rookie, 1.08 in his next season. And they were just like kept sticking with him. 1.63 the following year, 1.76 in year 4, was elite in 2018. So he hit elite status in his 5th season. He got to like mediocre to / I would say a little better than mediocre by his 3rd season. but he was bad in his first 2 years. And Johnston was at 0.88 yards per run, so worse than anything Adams ever did. I'm just like, I think that he could be out there and run routes, but it's sort of like he's graduating to like a Zay Jones. Like you're hoping, like he's out there, he turns in some occasional useful weeks for me, but it's hard for me to see how he goes from what he was last year to like a true breakout this year. I think he maybe 3-4 years down the line, we're like, oh wow, Johnston turned his career around. He actually put something together. But the problem with Johnston is that when we see these big first round busts, like a N'Keal Harry, right? Like a Jalen Reagor, guys I liked, they can get passed by like anybody. Travis Fulgham, Jacoby Myers, like these dudes that have no pedigree can come in and just like become the wide receiver one on a team. This is a deep wide receiver class that's got like, you know, like Brendan Rice could play ahead of Quentin Johnston. Like Jamari Thrash, I think, could play ahead of Quentin. Like there's a lot of guys. So I agree with you that they're not going to spend the 5th pick on him or on a wide receiver, but I don't know. He was so bad that, and a boom bust prospect coming in where I'm like, okay, I thought you had a really low floor. You showed me like an ultra low floor rookie season. It's like, I just want you to be someone else's problem this year.
Yeah. And even if he does become the number one alpha in the Chargers offense, how valuable actually is that with how much like Roman Wilson, Jim Harbaugh and all that? I get it, but like it's in the 13th, 14th round. Like
that's true.
I'm okay with that level of upside. That's another thing. I'm only looking for upside when we're getting in the 13th, 14th round.
Right. But I'd rather take swings on Devontae Walker or Ricky Pearsall or whatever, where you're getting like this dude could be breaking out at the end of the season in a real way. And yeah, I just have a hard time saying Jalen Polk goes right around there. What are your thoughts on the Chargers? Like, because are we getting too wrapped up in the narrative of they're only going to run the ball? But it does feel like that, right?
No. I mean, I like Gus Edwards, and I don't think I've ever really said that before.
Yeah, I know.
No, I think we've gotten to a place with the level of kind of information and analytics that when someone shows you who they are, believe them. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what we've seen with both Roman and Harbaugh. Like, it's very clear. And the trading away of Keenan Allen and the not, re-signing Big Mike, like it's very clear what this team wants to be. And I very, very quickly dropped my ranking of Herbert to like, I think I was past Caleb was the big one, I think. And I still feel great about that. Like I feel so bad.
I still have him ahead of Caleb, but I have no issues with Caleb over him.
Yeah, I mean, look at just the weapons. Look at like what their team is telling you they want to do. And here, this is a great segue. Let's go into your Chicago wide receivers because you are more bullish than I am. And I'll give at the very top. I just think that like we're not going to see the volume between Keenan and DJ Moore. There's not great data on wide receivers excelling with a rookie quarterback. I think Caleb I love from a fantasy perspective, but I also think like a decent amount of that is coming on the ground. And I think they were pretty up in pace last year. I think they were like 8th or 9th or something in total snaps from last year. So it's not like I expect them to play a very slow game, but usually what we see with a rookie QB is you do play a little, safer. And yeah, the CJ Stroud from just last year was obviously in our heads that like there's still substantial upside if your QB can figure it out. But that's why I'm just a little lower on the Keenan and DJ, but would love to hear because I could just be wrong on this one.
Well, Moore is the one that I'm behind ADP on him. But like the markets just refused to budge. I was actually lower on Moore, I think behind Tank. And
sorry to interrupt, but we've seen that all across the ADP. People just aren't budging. They're take locked. And the Calvin Ridley one, there's so many of these players, the Tyjae Spears, where we'll see when the big board comes out when the BBM comes out, but just because people have been drafting, like if you were starting right now, there's no way DJ Moore would be being drafted where he is ahead of, I don't know, is it both San Francisco wide receivers?
Yeah. He's got an ADP of 20. Like he's going, Yeah, ahead of Drake London, ahead of Brandon Ayuk,
Ahead of Davante.
ahead of Devontae, ahead of Debo, ahead of Chris Olave, Tank Dell. Like if it was Pat versus Pat, like if I'm the only, I'm just drafting against myself in all of these, I think I would slot him in ahead of Waddle. Kind of like a mid to late third round type of pick. But that was just not leading to any DJ Moore. So I was like, at this point, I don't want to. I was taking a fair amount of him in the mid second because I didn't anticipate them doing the Keenan thing. And so I don't need like a ton more, but I don't want to be like full fading him now. But yeah, I mean, I generally agree. Like this is not, I think Moore in particular, Keenan Allen was still really good last year, could end up being kind of a safety blanket guy for Caleb Williams. Moore is kind of more the inconsistent spike week guy. And if you're overpaying for that by like close to a round, I don't love it. So I'm just not willing to not have any because I think the Bears offense could be pretty fun. One thing I'll say about Caleb is, and Keenan, I'm actually behind ADP on as well. I'm just it's kind of a similar thing. Like I'm willing to mix him in, but I will say with Caleb, like he wasn't a particularly willing scrambler from a clean pocket, and that's generally something I look at like, all right, are you actually going to be out there creating rushing yards? Or are you more of a guy who's going to scramble around and then look to throw downfield, which is very much Caleb Williams. Like that's his whole thing. I think the passing volume could be a little bit better than we might think because like Shane Waldron, is he going to be designing like a lot of designed runs for Caleb? Maybe, but he doesn't have like a history of that. So it could be that I think around the goal line, Caleb Williams will add with his legs. And I'm not saying Caleb Williams can be a zero with his legs. This isn't an anti-Caleb Williams thing. This is there might be more passing volume in Chicago than we're anticipating thing.
Yeah, I think that's fair. For me with the Keenan Allen, he just came from like the perfect situation. Like Justin Herbert, I mean, absolutely love that from a wide receiver standpoint. Keenan Allen, yes, he's efficient, but he's also a volume kind of wide receiver. And his biggest days were when he was putting up like, 9 catches, 12 targets, 110 yards. Like he's definitely not your like touchdown threat. And so when you're moving into where he may be the number 2 wide receiver for kind of the first time in his career, he could also be number 1. I don't know. I'm just, it's unknown with DJ Moore. It's a little, and I think.
Are you taking like Christian Kirk ahead of him?
It's probably pretty close. I think from like a projections standpoint, like we're gonna have Kirk ahead of him. From like a big board, I've maxed out my big board, so I'm not doing anything right now. But I think from a game theory, like this probably makes a little more sense to go Keenan Allen just because Christian Kirk's moving up, Keenan Allen moving back. But like, I think it's really close. And I didn't want to go into the Christian Kirk earlier, but like I do think Christian Kirk actually has a breakout season in him. And Leone's pushed this one into me very strong that like we don't actually know what a breakout wide receiver looks like. And
I love how much Leone loves Christian Kirk.
Right. And so like I'm willing to give him that, and I believe it now too. And I think the biggest thing for Christian Kirk this year is that he's actually going to get to go back in the slot more often where he's really thrived. Last year he was, especially early in the year, he was taking out the field for 3 wide receiver sets, but even when he was back on, like still didn't have that kind of role that we like. And I think Trevor Lawrence, like despite him, not being the greatest actual QB, I think he's still very valuable for his wide receivers. And I could see Christian Kirk just being a pure alpha in that offense.
Yeah, I'm not like in on that, but I don't want to. When I'm betting against that in August, I want to have a big bag of early Christian Kirk. Like this is one thing I've tried to get better at in best ball and fantasy in general. Is like I know I'm going to be arguing with Leone about, late third round Christian Kirk. He's like, this is easy. We just take Christian Kirk at the turn. Like, no, we need to be hunting for breakouts. He could be a breakout, blah, blah, blah. I'm willing, and I'm honestly looking forward to that argument when we have it. But I want to have that argument with a big bag of 5th round Christian Kirk. Because like, then I get to win. Like if Leone's right and he breaks out and he is coming off career high yards per route run and less target competition and he has good quarterback play. So like, Leone's going to have a pretty decent case. And what I want is to be taking him now. We're like, I really never understood. People were not, I guess they were nervous Ridley would come back and everything, but I think he's better than Ridley. So I wasn't that nervous about it. And yeah, I mean, if you're getting, this is a price tag where you're not paying for a breakout, you're just paying for production. And the production compared to, I was trying to make that case with Hopkins, but like no pushback that he is much safer than DeAndre Hopkins. Like he's the clear one. Even if they draft somebody, he's the one.
Oh, clearly. Yeah. And I think even if Ridley came back, that was still going to be the case. I'm looking now 19% of Christian Kirk, my 7th highest owned wide receiver.
It might be higher than that, actually. Let me see.
I think you need to get some props for when you do have these with Leone. Like just have a bag, and then on the bag, just put Christian Kirk and like just tell him, no, my bags are packed. Like you need to just.
My bags are packed, buddy. Yeah. No, I'm at 20% Kirk. So I've been taking a lot.
Love that.
He's been kind of a cheat code. Is like you need a reliable volume wide receiver with upside that you're not going to feel great about when it's being touted in the 3rd round in the summer. That's a perfect 5th round pick. It's an ideal 5th round pick. All right, who else do we close out on here? Let's talk. I want to hear your thoughts on Jalen Warren, a guy that I'm mega bullish on, but you're bullish on as well.
I'm gonna say that I was not bullish enough early on. The Najee getting more of the workload towards the end of last year definitely concerned me. When you dive a little deeper, I understand there's arguments against it. I'm mostly like, I was very heavy on Najee early on, and I thought he was a screaming value. And my shift moved more towards, I just want to be very heavy on the Pittsburgh running game in general.
That makes sense.
The whole Arthur Smith aspect, it's funny, also the fantasy community, it's all like, oh, Arthur Smith, like you destroyed my London and my Pitts bags, and like, oh, and my Bijan bags. But really what he's done is designed a very efficient run game. It was just very frustrating when his 1st round pick, that Bijan, was not getting all the work and Algier was getting some there too. So like we leave this kind of bitter taste in our mouth with Arthur Smith, but really there's actually a very sweet taste for the overall just efficiency of the run games under Arthur Smith. So I want to have both of them. I'm fully understanding that like if I was making a bet, I think Najee outscores Jalen next year. I'd probably be willing to bet a decent amount on that. But Jalen definitely has the better opportunity to become that kind of top 5, top 10 running back.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And yeah, how much you're betting on Warren versus Najee probably says something about how much you want to take those bigger swings versus Najee. I mean, Najee's a value, man. Like I have no issues with Najee at all. And when this is another thing too for me. Like when I am like Najee Harris, a guy who I've like basically campaigned against his entire NFL career, is now a value. Like he's a value. If I think he's a value, he's a value. I have him rated ADP, a little ahead actually, but not super ahead. The guy that I'm most terrified of the ETR projections on is probably Josh Jacobs, where I'm like, dude, pick 19. Is that where Josh Jacobs is going to go after Leone finishes his projection model? Like this is, so I've been trying to get ahead of that. It's kind of a Kirk situation where I feel even stronger. I want to be ahead of the curve here, and in a way, have we benefited here from the anchoring bias that you talked about earlier? Like Josh Jacobs,
100%.
He should be going in the middle of the 3rd round at least, right?
Yeah, he's going to end this summer, I think, in the 2nd round, probably late 2nd round. And I think you were saying this on a recent podcast, and you were like, and at that point, I'm willing to be out on him. And I kind of agree from a structural standpoint. I don't think it's honestly going to be a bad pick if you were to take him in the end of the 2nd round. I think structurally, that's where I'm a little more hesitant to do it. Like I have him at 26 right now. And yeah, this anchoring is probably the number one lesson from this big board season is people are going to anchor to the ADP. People are not going to react fast enough. Like I made a tweet earlier that I think the week after the free agency stuff went out, happened, that was like the best time to draft because you can actually adapt to the news and people aren't adapting to ADP. But turns out even 3 weeks later, people still haven't really adapted. Like, yeah, we lost a little of the value and such, but yeah, Josh Jacobs, I guess his ADP right now is 38.2. He's legit going to be end of summer as a late 2nd rounder.
It's wild. I mean, I was doing a draft with Pete Overzet, and there's a lot of wide receivers to go off the board in those rooms, but we had
Really?
Josh. Yeah. Are you familiar with that name?
hot dog meme.
Yeah, exactly. We were at the 311, and we grabbed a wide receiver, not Jacobs, but the guy at the turn had 2 running backs. So we're like, we're going to push him around the turn, and we grabbed him at 402. And it's like, man, that's pretty good. Like he's going to be out there like chugging along, doing his thing. But like, it's like one of these things where that used to cost you a early to mid second round pick. And when it costs you a 4th round pick, it's pretty cool. Like I'm into it at that price.
I think he was a 1-2 turn, like this type of what he's going to get, what he's going to provide on a strong Green Bay offense with AJ Dillon is not posing much of a risk other than maybe, getting just the, hey, breathers. I think historically we would have drafted him as a 1-2.
2019 1-2 turn. Completely agree.
Yeah. I mean, we were doing Joe Mixon there for so long. There was so long that it was just like that same kind of idea of, well, we know Joe Mixon's on a strong team and he's getting the entire backload. And there were some years that we actually thought Joe Mixon had efficiency because Josh Jacobs, I don't care. And I think so early in the summer, I think one of the things we differed on the most is I was actually overweight on the guys like Josh Jacobs because
early in this tournament.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. That you won that. That was a miss for me in a way. Like that's one that I do look back and I'm like, I should have seen that because the running back class, the rookie class isn't good. And so it was actually predictable that these veterans would find good spots.
And I think if you looked at the contracts and the free agents, we expected there to be a lot of movement. And when I looked at a guy like Josh Jacobs, I know that like from a fantasy community, we're kind of down on him because efficiency, but I think coaches really do value that dependability. He's going to be out there. He can give them a large workload. We know that first round draft capital from before means that it's just kind of continue to get that positive feedback loop. And so I thought there was just minimal risk from a landing spot for him. And obviously this was probably like a top 3-4 landing spot that we had no idea was even possible. Like didn't even know Green Bay was going to be able
This wasn't even a landing spot.
Right. Yeah.
Aaron Jones was good last year. Like it shouldn't have been. They had him under contract. What's going on? But
there were also 20 minutes that we thought this was a horrible landing spot.
Right. Yeah, it's to see the commitment. And I guess I was getting some pushback in the last pod I did of like, oh, Josh Jacobs didn't get as much money as people thought. But it's like he got enough and they cut Aaron Jones. Like this is a 2024 commitment. They really can't get out of the deal in any way that makes sense next year. So he's job security wise, they bring back AJ Dillon. They're not going to draft somebody. And then, maybe day 3 they will, but that's fine. He's
bringing back AJ Dillon helps.
It helps. Yeah, it helps.
Make that clear. I'm happy about that because yes, like you have a level of familiarity. So like, yes, he's going to play some and I'm okay with that. He will probably get some of the between the 20s, low value touches that if anything, just keep Josh Jacobs kind of healthy. What we're not concerned about is them drafting someone like your Audric or Ray Davis or whatever, who, oh shit, this guy actually has some bursts. Maybe he actually can eat into it. AJ Dillon, he's eating a lot of things, but he's not eating into Josh Jacobs' work.
Yeah. And honestly, it could be like if the Jets hadn't brought in Dalvin Cook last year, that actually would have been worse for Breece Hall because like Izzy Abanikanda has a lot more juice than Dalvin Cook did last year. And when did we see that juice? Like in spurts at the very end of the season as the Jets were realizing it themselves. So even if they bring in a talented rookie, he's going to have to pass AJ Dillon. That's going to take most of the season. Like it's not Jacobs that has to worry here. So Dillon is pretty bullish. In the same way, Zamir White, it helps that they brought in Madison, I think. Let's close with Nick Chubb and Austin Eckler Nick Chubb and TJ Hockenson. Hockenson, we're both out on. He's going to miss a bunch of the year with this knee injury. We have quarterback concerns there. I think early on, the Vikings were just way too high in ADP, Addison and Hockenson specifically. He is falling some, but we're still both. And I've booted the ADP out of this on Hockenson. Like, I just think the market's wrong on this. I'm not taking him. You agree. But Chubb is someone I am not. I feel very similarly on where I'm like, this is a serious multi-ligament, plus some other stuff. I'm learning words when I find out what happened to Nick Chubb's knee, kind of thing. And I mean, they bring in Diontae Foreman, which I don't think is like a huge deal, but it's a sign that they're making sure they have like an early down running back in the early part of the year. I'm guessing he starts the year on PUP. I don't know if his ADP will fall to where I have him, but it's just hard for me to see like him screaming up boards this summer. If anything, I could see him falling from here.
It's not going to be when you see where he's going to come out in the ETR ranks, but
high or low?
Closer to where I am.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is like, I did not think I was ever going to be above ADP on Nick Chubb throughout the entire couple months that we've been drafting. I've been substantially below ADP up until I feel like pretty recently. I ended up with only 4% of him because his ADP early on was like in the 60s or such. And I think now it's a bit more kind of the hate's just gone too far. The offseason actually with the signings, I think turned out pretty well for me. Early on, I was baking in there's cut risk. They may just get rid of him. They may bring in another legitimate back, but all they brought in was Diontae Foreman. So now it's like Nick Chubb, Diontae Foreman. My guess is Diontae Foreman is there just until Nick Chubb kind of gets healthy. And so the way that I see it is, yes, he's a riskier bet because he's always been so good on efficiency. He hasn't been that pass catcher. And are you going to lose that efficiency coming off the injury in his age 28 season? I think
turns 29 in December.
Okay. It counts as age 28 season, right?
We usually say the year he turned. I call it age 29 season. I'm rounding up.
So like I see the risks there. But then when it came out, like, and this is one where I started to move him backwards, but then I'm starting to hear these kind of murmurs of where the rest of the ETR kind of is on him. And when you actually do the numbers, and again, we're baking in the early miss, how many games that is. I'm not sure if we're looking at something like 4. That was kind of my initial estimate. This team, I'm more bullish on in general. And so I think like we still can see in the second half of next year a strong Nick Chubb. But this isn't someone that I really want to go to bat on. And I'm defaulting a little to what I'm hearing in my ear from some of the other people from like a projection standpoint.
Okay. I would love to be not bearish on Nick Chubb. It would be very fun if he comes back and crushes. It's just
haven't we been bearish on him like entire career as like fantasy analysts because
that's true.
Of him just being such an outlier? Like it's tough, I know, but yeah.
No, and you're betting on like extreme efficiency because he's never even been like a 2-down workhorse. He's, he gets spelled and then he doesn't catch passes. And I mean, I was in on Breece Hall last year coming off a knee tear, but like it was a clean ACL. And I think if there's one thing that I think the market's like, and now I'm talking about the best ball market, but like, I'd hear like, oh, Javonte Williams or Breece Hall, like what's really the difference? Like the difference is called the MCL. And one guy tore it and the other guy didn't. Like I'm still pretty nervous about older running back coming off of like major, multi-ligament tear. Plus he had some additional damage. So there was hope initially that he didn't tear the ACL. He did end up having to get a second surgery. I don't know. Like, I guess what I would say, if I end up coming up on Nick Chubb, it would be because I'm hearing bullish stuff from the doctors on this, that they're like, because I don't quite understand why Nick Chubb's injury was still better than the worst case scenario at the time. But I do get the sense that it was. I know there was concern about arterial damage at one point and that didn't occur as far as I know. So that's really good. But yeah, I'm just nervous about that injury, man. This was not like a clean ACL tear type of thing that you bounce right back from is my concern.
Yeah. Where you have him at 120. I think it's safe to say, like, where would you compare the running backs being drafted, or if you want to say a little, more around ADP in the 90, 100 that have legendary upside compared to him? Because his legendary upside docs are coming off the injury, his age, and doesn't have the pass catching. Is there still a path for him where if we say the injury actually was, is clean and his recovery is strong, he's not going to magically catch more passes, but just based off like his efficiency before on a strong offense, like I'm asking you, do you see that light, or is that just that light's completely turned off?
Yeah, I mean, last year, I didn't think Nick Chubb had a ton of legendary upside when he was healthy and going in the second round. Last year, my recommendation was a fade on Nick Chubb, which I think was as a best ball pick that was going to hurt. As a redraft pick, maybe a little bit more survivable. But best ball
round, it's really expensive.
Yeah, right. The guys that I'm looking at instead of Chubb right now are like Devin Singletary, Chuba Hubbard. So, I mean, legendary upside, like none, 0. But touches, old school dead zone back guaranteed touches, but available outside of the top 100 picks. Like, all right, like I can work with that. Like I need that. That's exactly what I'm looking for right now at this part of the draft. Nick Chubb could be that, at the end of the season, and it's going to be back weighted to the end of the season. And, he surprises with how quickly he's able to come back to full form. And by the end of the year, we're getting some like really nice production out of Nick Chubb. Like, hell yeah. Like that sounds awesome. And, he can definitely pay off. Like he can definitely beat these running backs if that shows up. But like when he's, I don't know, what's his ADP?
90, about
90. Yeah, at 90, it's him versus Connor, who's going to start the season. He was completely healthy. Like I've got some age concerns about Connor, same as I do Chubb, but he's healthy. Javonte Williams now 2 years off the injury. And Mostert's just coming off all the touchdowns. Obviously, they could draft somebody. Swift, I don't love, but like they just signed him to decent money. He's going to start there. Like it's like all these dudes are starting out of the gate, and they're not Chubb when he's healthy, but I think like if Chubb comes back and plays like Mostert did last year, like it's probably pretty good.
Yeah, well, obviously, yeah, that'd be amazing. But
but I can just bet on Mostert, who could play like Mostert last year.
It's not someone that I have a strong level of confidence in.
Yeah,
I think there's so much unknown with that from the injury aspect. But I do think it's worth noting the offseason was kind to him with the signings, and maybe that should give us a little more confidence that the Browns didn't go out and bring in one of these so many backs that were available from a health, to indicate a health standpoint.
I'm raising a little. I hate being this low on him. It's not fun. Yeah, I'm mostly justifying my bear stance as opposed to.
One note on your guys that you're talking about, though, I think you should have a substantially larger gap between Singletary and Chuba Hubbard.
Because you're more bullish on him than me. You have him at 94. I'm at 118. Why do you like Singletary so much more?
Yeah, so I'm not gonna say like I think Singletary has this kind of great upside, but if you look at that contract, he is locked into the New York Giants for the next 2 years. It's a 3-year contract, but it's really the 2 years they kind of locked him in. And if we kind of say from a draft perspective, they have so many other positions of need, a lot of defense, offensive line, not expecting to bring in kind of substantial back. So I think we can have more confidence when we're talking about like projectable volume for Devin Singletary as the running back in that offense. Obviously, you have the connection with the coaching staff as well. Chuba, we've got new coaching staff. Yes, like he got a lot of the work last year, but I would not be shocked if they draft another running back. I wouldn't be shocked if just an unknown happens. Like there's no linking that we've seen in the past to Chuba as you do with the current staff. And like from a talent wise, I don't know, Devin Singletary, like both teams are going to be bad. Like I think it's just a lot of yuck, but Singletary I think is so much more locked into that role. And Chuba, it's a lot of yuck with like, oh, there might also be some legit downside in his role.
Yeah, that's fair. I think he's a little protected by Miles Sanders from them drafting someone with, but also it was such a disaster last year that they could just be like, we don't care. We need to save this quarterback. We're going to bring a running back we like. No, I think that's pretty convincing. I moved Singletary up a bit. He just exists to take over backfields. Like it's wild. Like he's
coaches love him.
They love him. The second you give Devin Singletary a snap, like it's over for the starter. Like he's coming for that full backfield.
And you know what? maybe like Zach Moss may actually not have been like, we thought that Devin Singletary was getting the Buffalo backfield because Zach Moss was like looking really bad. But like maybe it's actually Zach Singletary. I mean, Singletary was actually decent. Moss goes to Indy, looks better than we expected. Obviously, they didn't like Dameon Pierce, but like maybe also Singletary. He's just so trustworthy for what the coaches want. And so I just, no, not making an crazy big upside case there. But if you have zero RB draft strategy and you need some early, just dependable work until your guys break out, I think Singletary is fantastic. And that's why I'm above market on him by like, I think 2 rounds.
Nice. Yeah, I moved him up a little bit to, let's see, he comes out at 109. So his ADP is 116. So I like seeing him there. When you need that running back, he's nice to see.
And I have no ADP baked in that one. I'm not baking any ADP into the recency free agency moves because I want to tell the market like you're locking in, and I think this is where they actually should go. Now draft accordingly.
It is funny that like Marquise Brown rocketed it up, but that's about. I mean, we're still both ahead of market, so maybe that's not a good example.
It's still lagging though. Like, okay. So tell me this: you have a really good wide receiver that we kind of like going to Kansas City, and he's still like going slowly. Like that's the I don't know, optimal example of like, okay, this really market should have adapted to this one.
Yeah, we've gotten excited about Chiefs wide receivers before, overly excited, some might say.
Oh yeah.
So it is weird that even then, and I don't know, someone in the ship chasing chat was like, stop, making fun of the market for not getting there on these players fast enough. But like, I do actually think it's an important thing to consider. Like how quickly does this market adjust? And it seems pretty clear, maybe it's not fully the drafters. Maybe it's like the underdog update schedule or something, or how long how much of a sample they keep for ADP or whatever.
I think it's the game. I think if you individually ask drafters what their rankings were, a lot of them are using you guys, a lot of them are using ETR. And so they may agree like, yeah, Marquise Brown should be higher. But because of the game that we play and the way that ADP ranks the players, we still wait to draft them until later on. And so it just takes a long time to really make that move. And then on the other end, when they're dropping, you see this player at the top, maybe they get auto drafted. Maybe you're like, I don't know. Maybe like it's a value because mentally you're like, this is 10 picks later. The game definitely locks. So I'm not, crapping on like the drafters and such, like they're our family. But I do think that like the game is like helps with the take lock or the draft lock or whatever we want to coin the term.
I think it also might have to do with the sample of ADP because DraftKings, like stuff moves on DraftKings. And maybe it's just people kind of just drafting on vibes a little more over there. I don't know. But like in the summer, it was pretty wild. Like, J.K. Dobbins would drop, a couple rounds based on like some minor.
He gets a Q
bearish news.
because once you get a red Q next year,
he gets the Q. Yeah, that's right. That's the Q. Yeah. So it's interesting. I think this might be like for the summer. I think this might be applicable where like underdog may move a little slower than than DraftKings, for example. And I think that's something you can use to your advantage, where it's like, do I reach for this riser? Maybe not. Maybe see if you can push them like another 6 picks or whatever. All right, man. This was awesome. Appreciate the time. Anything? It sounds like, you got to be excited about the refresh of these rankings, getting the projection baked in. Telling Leone, you get to argue with Leone before anyone. That's exciting in and of itself.
It's good. The process is impressive. The whole team does a phenomenal job with these. And they're just nonstop going in the weeds on each individual team. So lots of fun there. For me, I just got back from Vegas. So I did March Madness in Vegas, and Rookies and Sophomores launched like the day before I flew out. So I was either going to only end up with like 20 of those drafts or throw in 130 slows. So I'm still in slow hell with Rookies and Sophomores.
Rookies and Sophomores slow draft hell is a different kind of hell. That's wild. How you must be constantly on the clock.
Yeah, but I'm doing first off, you have to turn notifications off. Like you just can't. And then I'm doing takes about 45 minutes to just each 7 hours go through, make the picks. And Sometimes you even have to do the let me just star and not pick when it's like close to the overnight. So then like I can just, not always.
Have you told Levitan about this?
I don't know. We did a mock draft the other day and I already got shot on story because I think I maxed out the big board. I've now got 300 plus drafts under me. I'm trying to not be that much of a
Levitan must be appalled.
He doesn't know.
Oh my god, the best ball life. It is what it is. I haven't done any slow drafts yet. I haven't been able to rip off the slow draft band-aid. I can't. But I'm trying to max the big board with fasts only, which I'm pretty sure I'm going to fail at, and then have to go to slows.
Yeah.
So
I'm usually the man who says I am so against slows. The benefit of rookies and sophomores for slows though is I'm pretty much going to be done in a 4 or 5 day period.
Right.
Because
nice.
It's four people drafting 12 rounds. They go pretty quickly. If you do 150 slows or whatever it is, that's a month. That is miserable.
And it's very hard to manage, figure out what you were thinking when, the last time you did it. So
this one doesn't matter. I know, I've got 3 wide running backs. I know how I'm drafting in these. And
I hope they haven't launched another one. I hope they do.
I don't think they will before the draft. They didn't last year.
Well, maybe make it bigger next time because it was a lot of fun. And then it's gone.
Adam's like, hey, should we do ranking of these? I'm like, it's already 50% full.
I did rankings of them, and I forgot to include DeMar Douglas, and everyone got mad.
And that's a great stack partner because you don't know if it's Drake May or Daniels.
I know. It's a big oversight. Julian McLaughlin as well didn't get in because I didn't have them marked in my last year's rankings is what it was.
Do you want to guess who my highest exposed player is in that?
JJ McCarthy?
I'm really going on a limb because I'm in that process where I have no idea how to pronounce some of these, but Isaac Arendo.
Oh, wow. Okay. Interesting. Big leverage.
Exactly. I just think for these, no one really was drafting him in the big board because he wasn't in it. And so no one really thinks about him in these. And so I think I probably have a super, super majority of like his overall draft shares because he's not being drafted at all.
All right. Well, if you're in any of slow drafts, a good chance you can snipe Herzig on Isaac Rondo now.
There it is. Love it.
Check out Legendary Upside. I just put out my second rookie quarterback article. Check that out. Going to have running back articles rolling out pretty soon here, and then going through the rest of the rookie class, wide receivers, tight ends, heading up to the draft. So check that out. Be back with you pretty soon. I think we may end up doing a rankings pod is the next thing, but we'll figure that out. See you then. Thanks for watching. Later.